Hello, Garland Nixon here with my dear friend Dr. Tony Montero. And Donald Trump is winning. Zionism is cratering. The Ukraine project is falling apart. And the question becomes with these crazy neocons, how far will they go? And how far will we go? Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and I'm here with my dear friend, Dr. Anthony Montero. Before we get going, Dr. Montero, he runs a wonderful group on Saturdays in Philadelphia called the Freedom School. If you could tell people where they could find the info on the Freedom School.
Well, it's actually the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. We can be found on our website, the Saturday Free School. We can be found on Facebook at the Saturday Free School. And if you just do a Google, we'll come up in Twitter, we'll come up in Instagram. Our various sessions can be found on Facebook, of course, on YouTube, and on Spotify. So we're a school, but actually we're more of a political ideological movement located in Philadelphia and working among the working people and young people and students in Philadelphia.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, let's get going. Let's start with Donald Trump. And that is, the fact of the matter is the last few days I've been watching the I don't know what you call them, the liberals, the faux left lose their mind. They're losing their mind after something happened that, of course, I think both of us knew would happen, understand why it happened, predicted it would happen. And that is Donald Trump blew out those other clowns in Iowa. Certainly, I'm not a fan. I'm not pro-Trump. I'm a far lefty or what have you. But I understand the dynamics that produces support for Trump. And I say this with no sorrow. I'm a lefty. Certainly Trump and Biden, and I don't like any of those parties. And I'm, probably, as I always joke and say, if you ask me, I'd probably write in, Che Guevara or something for president. But in all honesty, if somebody put a gun in my head and said, okay, there's one vote left, they're tied up, Trump and Biden, and you're the deciding vote, I'd have to vote for Trump. I'd have to, I asked my cousin from Baltimore City, and he's a guy grew up in the hood, what have you, right? Now, he's got a great education, what have you, but he's a guy grew up in the hood from Baltimore City. He knows what time it is on the street. I asked him the same question, and his answer was, that's a stupid question. Why would you even ask me such a silly question? Of course I'd vote for Trump. That's a brother from the hood, And so what I'm seeing is, as I said, I'm a far lefty. I believe that this country goes in a different direction, needs to go in a far different direction. But I understand that when people look at the current system, that's what people don't want to understand. When they look at the institutions, when they look at the direction things are going, and they have to make a choice, I understand why people would choose Trump. Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I hear you, but I think I'm on the same page with you in terms of politics. I don't know whether I would call myself a far lefty, but my whole life has been as a person of the left. I follow in that tradition called the Black radical tradition, and the leading figures there in my mind are Du Bois and Robeson and Angela Davis and of course the great Martin Luther King Jr., James Baldwin, and many, many others, of course. But then on the other hand, I have a certain method for understanding politics. and especially for understanding this political moment. And while, it is a race between two people, pretty much Biden and Trump, one a Democrat and one a Republican, hence two parties. And frankly, we're not clear, to be honest, we're not very clear about what these parties are today. I would suggest that the party that calls itself Democrat is not the party of Franklin D. Roosevelt or even Lyndon B. Johnson. This is a party of war, a party of austerity, a party of the rich. It is made up of the richest demographics in America. The working class and the lower middle class is being driven out of the Democratic Party. Either they're being driven out or they're leaving in disgust, that party. But on the other side, there's a Republican Party that is not the Republican Party, is the Trump Party. But even after we take all of that into account, I think the central force giving dynamism to this moment are the people. And this election, I don't care whether it's Iowa, I don't care whether it's New Hampshire or whether it's the general election. What we're seeing, people are expressing deep discontent, anger at the ruling and governing classes of this society. The people are saying, in no uncertain terms, they're fed up and tired of war and war spending at the expense of taking care of the people of this country. The people are afraid of their economic future, even though we're told by the government that things are getting better, that the economy is going to see a soft landing from the inflation and all of that. People don't believe it. I guess what I would say, this is an election where the people will decide in ways that they have not decided before what will be the political direction of this country. Trump is but the vessel for the anger and discontent of the people. I would add, so is Cornel West. So is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And others. But the point that we have to look at, if we take any of these candidates outside of Biden, that's a whole nother question, of course, and we can come back to that. But all of these candidates of opposition, the fringe candidates, the candidates who speak to those who believe they have nothing to lose and no future, all of those candidates are reliant upon the people. And the people are speaking in ways that we have not heard or seen them speak in I don't know when. And Iowa, that smashing defeat for Trump in Iowa was a victory for the people. He wins 98 of 99 counties. And the one that he lost, he only lost that by one vote. It shocked the ruling elite and the Democratic Party strategists. They felt that there would be something more or less decisive. This was a decisive defeat. One could say, if we use the chessboard analogy, it was check, not yet checkmate. Probably checkmate will occur next week in the New Hampshire primary. Then the primary season is over. The Democrats already decided they weren't going to have a primary. And so Marianne Williamson and the other guy. I mean, they're just, I don't know, in it for the ride. But so it is Trump and Biden. And I think finally, I would say, from a political sociology point of view, it is a mass movement of the discontented versus the elite, the educated, the powerful. And we just have to see how it plays out.
Let me ask you this, because part of the, I guess the title here, how far will they go, and I'd like that to apply that to a couple of different arenas. But when it comes to Trump, I think that the more he wins, particularly in a blowout like this, he wins in a blowout one day, and the next day he's in court, for this suit that literally the New York State legislature had to go into session and to change the law so that this woman could sue Trump, right? They had to dig into his personal finances and say, oh, he asked for, he overvalued his property. And so now the bank said, no, we got paid, we're good. Everybody involved in it was a victimless, if it was a crime, administrative crime. The more you look at that, and the more you look at, okay, I think they said 30 minutes into the Iowa caucus, they pretty much called it for Trump, right? And I would make this argument: 30 minutes into the primary season, you could pretty much call it for Trump, right? Yeah. The question becomes, with them looking at Trump, I've seen this. They're now saying the Pentagon's looking to see what they can do in case Trump acts in a dictatorial way, like maybe tries to end stop a conflict or something like that, or shake hands with, try to bring some, some peace to the Korean Peninsula. I'm not saying he'll do that, but they're horrified that he might try. How far will they go? That's the question, because they can see that the Republican Party has said, we want Trump. He got, I think Biden's getting 28% of the independents. This thing's over. If Biden and Trump run in a fair fight, Trump's going to win. It's over, right? The question becomes, I know that you know it. I think they might have figured it out by now. What do you think about the reaction of the ruling elite?
Well, I think this is another area of study. And it's very interesting. We've never seen the ruling class of this country act like this. They've always put on a face of confidence that America can do anything, meaning they, the ruling elite, are so capable, so well educated, so refined that they can do anything. They are now in a state of panic. We've never seen this. And they're resorting to measures that only improve Trump's electoral position, and especially his position among the masses, among the people. Every attack upon him benefits him among the people. Now, of course, let's be clear. His base is primarily white, but it is among that part of the white population without college degrees. The working class, the working poor, the discontented among the whites. Now, does he have others? Does he have rich white people? Does he even have billionaires? Of course he does. But his base is among that part of the white population that has been looked down upon, talked badly about, sneered at by the elite. And these people know it, and they're pushing back. That's why Trump says that I am your retribution, and it resonates. But the ruling elite has panicked. If you read articles, read Robert Kagan. I would recommend your listeners, if they have an opportunity, look it up, Google it. Robert Kagan's article, the title of which I do not remember at this time, but it appeared about 2 weeks ago in the Washington Post, where he literally kind of admits and then takes it back and then admits it again, that the ruling elite of this country are in deep trouble, that the people have turned against them. It looks like Trump will win, and the US empire is in trouble as a consequence. Or as Richard Haas, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations. And again, I would recommend to your listeners that they Google Richard Haas, New York Times, the greatest threat to America's interests. And Richard Haas openly admits what Robert Kagan also says: the greatest threat to the American empire is the American people. This has sent them into panic mode. The fact of the matter is that to understand the ruling elite of this country, you have to see them as an elite that rules over an empire. You know, all of these military bases, all of these warships, all of these aircraft carriers, all of the technologies of war, all of the economic levers, including the dollar as the reserve currency, all of this has established the United States as the most powerful, perhaps the greatest empire in human history. To understand the ruling class, you have to understand them from the outside in. Don't just attempt to understand their domestic policies and think you understand what all of this is about. It is about empire. It is about the rules-based economic order, which has nothing to do with international law, by the way, and what is in effect a Pax Americana, an American peace, that America rules the world, and America's rule over the world is necessary if the wealth of the ruling elite is to be secured. That's what we're looking at. Trump and this movement that is animating him. This movement of the American people is the greatest threat to the American empire that it has ever faced.
Now, in the chat, there are people that saying Trump's a member of the ruling elite, and they're saying various things about Trump that I don't disagree with. Keeping in mind, Bonapartism and the ruling elite having, factional arguments and trying to enlist part of the working class in their fights and all those things being said, right? So this is not some Trump cheerleading game here, but I think it's to understand Brexit. In Brexit in England, in talking to the people that I've talked to in England, people that I know it well, have basically said the people in England, the working class, have been so put upon by the ruling elite there that they saw it a chance. They had not had a chance to swing a sledgehammer at these people. And when they knew that the ruling elite didn't want a Brexit, it was an opportunity to swing a sledgehammer at them. And they took that opportunity. And I say about Trump, there are a lot of people that says, I don't care who comes into the White House as long as they got an axe. And they start swinging it when they come in the door. And that's the way they see, regardless of what Trump is. And the fact of the matter is, there's some things that Trump would do that would be disruptive to the empire. There's things that he do that we absolutely wouldn't like. We hate his rhetoric, things like that. But there are things that would disrupt the empire. And it would be a demonstration to the ruling elite. No. You think you choose the candidate every time. Even if it's somebody we don't like that much, somebody you can't stand, we'll choose them. And it's kind of a defeat for the ruling elite that they wouldn't know how to deal with. Anyway, your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, well, I would have to differ a bit on how we understand the ruling class. the influence of a certain kind of dogmatic Marxism has led many to believe that anybody that is rich or anybody that is a multimillionaire or billionaire is ipso facto a part of the ruling class. That is not the case in every instance. I don't see Trump at this moment as a part of the ruling class, nor does the ruling class. The ruling class sees him as an enemy of their interests, and they are treating him as such.
Oh, well, let me stop you 1 second.
Okay.
1 second, because I got to throw something that I think you'll understand why I threw it in there, and then you can go on. You know, I used to be with Fox News. When I was with Fox News, and when he was running in 2016, I heard someone in the green room, whose name I won't mention because everybody here would know who they are, who mentioned Trump as, quote, a traitor to his class.
Yes.
So that kind of goes along with what you're saying. They don't see him as, and that the powerful people see class first. But at any rate, you're right. They don't see him as such. Continue.
No, and it's not unusual. And, you know, Fidel Castro was a child of the Cuban elite. V.I. Lenin, who led the Russian Revolution, was a child of a family who were not at the upper levels of the society, but somewhere near it. They were professionals. They were educated people in a society where 90% of the people were uneducated.
Patrice Lumumba.
Yeah.
Same thing. Lumumba
Patrice
was
Lumumba.
well educated in a society that.
That's right. That's
poverty.
right. That's right. Many people say, well, look, Martin Luther King was from a comfortable background. He was a part of the Black upper class. But it is not unusual in history for figures, for very complicated reasons, to become traitors to the class that they either once belonged to or should belong to. I think Trump is an interesting political and historical study. It is hard to pigeonhole him. Certainly, he is an enemy of the ruling class of this country. That's the first thing. No matter how quirky, how inconsistent in his statements he is not embraced by the ruling class. The other thing we have to understand is that the ruling class is not split. The American ruling class is probably more united now than it's ever been. And it's united in several ways. One, domestically, to defeat Trump. The entire ruling class, well, maybe one or two that you could find that are not for it. But the ruling class and its institutions, I don't care whether it's the court system, the Federal Reserve System, the banking system, the political system, the universities, whatever. All of the elites are pretty much against Trump. The other thing is that not only are they defined by their anti-Trump position, but, and this is as big, and I think it's interconnected, they are united in the idea that the American empire is now facing its greatest crisis. The rise of China, the rise of BRICS, the decline of the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, which means that it dominates all transactions and trade, and on and on and on. They see all that coming down upon them. And they see a new world order emerging. So they are, at this point, united around, I think, these two objectives. Defeat Trump, which is to say the defeat of that movement, to throw this movement of the discontented, the alienated, the impoverished, the people who do not have a future in this country economically, who feel themselves politically powerless, who see an elite that abuses democracy. They have to stop this movement. This is an existential question for them. But now they have to stop the movement in the Middle East. The world changed on October 7th. I don't think it'll ever be the same.
Let's talk about that. A couple of things going on. The importance of South Africa going after Zionism like that. The importance of not just that anyone called out Israel, but South Africa, a country that they made it through. And afterwards, they didn't go and say, we're going to hang all the white people. They did the Truth and Reconciliation. They came out of it. I'm not saying, I've got some issues with the ANC. I'm sure you do too, whatever, right? But I'm just saying that South Africa now, and this is critical, they're making their move on Israel. Israel had nothing to rebut it. But now, and this is important, South Africa says they're writing one up for the US and UK. Joe Biden, Tony Blinken, ruling elite in Europe, you are next. I see South Africa as the leading edge of BRICS. I don't see that South Africa would just wake up one day and say, we're going to do it on our own. If they didn't have some, Russia, China, etc., a lot of power behind them, because the US would just crush them. So I see this as the leading edge of BRICS saying, we don't want to hear this rules-based international order crap anymore. We're going to hold you accountable to international law, but not now. I also read they're writing up, in the same way that they did Israel, a history, including Iraq, including in Libya, and they're going to present that to the court. I find that extraordinary. How important is that? Your thoughts on the ICJ dynamics?
Oh, I think it's hugely important, because when you use the word apartheid, and everyone acknowledges that the Israeli government is an apartheid government. So if you use that word, which is a Dutch word, used in South Africa by the Dutch rulers, once that word is invoked, South Africa has to come up in the discussion. And so it is. The anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, which is a global struggle, a people's struggle, and finally it brought down that regime. I think the South Africans morally have something to say about apartheid. They lived it and they can speak on it, and they are. But I think the moral political force that South Africa has comes from the 154 nations that voted in the General Assembly for a ceasefire. And I see South Africa as moving to the vanguard of those nations who are sick and tired of Israel's abuse of the Palestinian people. And so on the heels of that, South Africa moved to the fore. And of course, there's been an evolution and a maturing of the ANC leadership in South Africa. The leadership of South Africa today is not what it was in 1994. They're more confident, they're more militant. The force of BRICS, of course, with China and Russia and Brazil and India, that's a powerful force economically. 40% of the world's economy is somehow connected to BRICS. BRICS is more important to the world economy than the European Union is. This is a major paradigm shift. It is an axial shift. Europe is no longer the center of the world, and the United States is not far behind Europe. The world is shifting to the Afro-Asiatic world, the dark world, the formerly colonized world, those nations that have suffered under the heel of the West. What Israel is doing is not the first genocide. This is not the Nazi genocide of the Jews, the Holocaust. That was not the first German Holocaust. The first German Holocaust was in Namibia, what was then called Southwest Africa, against the Herero people. You know, King Leopold in the Congo. Millions of people killed. And I don't even have to begin to mention the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans killed in what was a genocide and a Holocaust. So the West has risen upon the backs of the darker nations of the world, committing genocide, coming into power in the world with blood and mud dripping from their teeth, from their hands. So they know genocide. The darker nations, the colonized nations of the world have been victims of genocide, and we know it. And therefore, when South Africa speaks, it speaks with the moral weight of humanity, with the moral weight of the darker peoples of the world. And I agree with, I think the way you put it, this is a moment of reckoning. This is a moment of payback. We're going to get even with you. And we're not stopping with Israel. We're talking about the Anglo-American alliance, which is the core of the Western military, economic, political configuration. This is a great day. There's symbolism here, but there's also the actual fact of a power shift, a new paradigm. And if I could just say one small thing, you know, and this is, because I follow your show very closely and I enjoy it very much, Garland. And you had done, I mean, just extraordinary work in clarifying the Ukraine situation. And how, in fact, it was NATO and the West and the United States who made it impossible for a peace agreement to be reached at the very outset of this. And that this war was not a war of choice, but a war of necessity on the part of Russia. It took a lot of courage to do that. But the world changed on October 7th. The political configuration of the world radically changed. By that I mean, well, first let's just take the diplomatic part of it, where nations overwhelmingly in the General Assembly vote against the US, where in the Security Council, the United States votes alone, opposing a ceasefire, where the United States, everybody knows, is arming Israel, the Biden administration that is, including with 2,000-pound bombs and using them against civilians. Everybody knows this. And I think that every great historical change is preceded by change in the moral architecture, the moral geography of the world. And for the first time in 400 or 500 years, the majority of people are speaking in one democratic voice. Therefore, when you look at the policies of Iran, of Hezbollah, of the Houthi in Yemen, of Hamas in Gaza, of affiliated groups in the West Bank, they all seem to be acting in a confident way that we've never seen the Arab and Muslim nations act. They were always fighting on the back foot. Now they have the winds of humanity at their backs. They feel confident. They feel that the West, in particular the United States, is a paper tiger. They have accurately assessed the American people's abhorrence to more war. They have seen the polls that you and I have looked at, where 70% of young people say they would not join the army to fight for their country in a foreign war. They see these huge demonstrations, and they say the American ruling class is at the lowest point in its history. And we, the nations of the world, what they call the global South, the dark nations, the formerly colonized nations, are saying that we are on the ascendancy, that a new world is coming into being, that unjust Nazi-type regimes like the one in Israel are the past. They will be destroyed by their own hands. Won't Hamas or Hezbollah will not destroy Israel. Israelis will destroy Israel. That Zionist project is over and done with.
The importance of Yemen, when I talk about revolution, right? Revolve, the bottom comes to the top.
Yes.
To me, there could be no greater symbol of it than Yemen. And I think part of it is this. I truly believe that the conflict in Ukraine is critical to all of these things happening for this reason, because the U.S. just pushed everybody around and nobody would ever do anything. Nobody would fight back. Nobody would push back. Everybody would acquiesce at some point. And Russians, being, you can historically looking, at some point said, this is as far as it goes. You're not going to surround us with bases and kill us. We have lost 30 million people in the last a war that where we know how this looks. We've seen this game before. And the Russians said, well, we're going to fight. And they were, in my opinion, when the U.S. got into Ukraine, they felt pushed into a corner and they came out fighting, and they have been quite well at it. And I do believe that the impetus for Hamas and for Yemen and these other places is, when you see somebody over there fight the bully, it inspires other people to say, well, you know what, doggone it, maybe they ain't tough as they thought. Plus, they're busy over there fighting you. Maybe I'll get a couple punches in here too. And when I see Yemen, a country that's impoverished, a country that for years was beaten, abused, and killed. Most people don't know the history of the British in Yemen, right? Abused them, slaughtered them, genocided them for years, and still got ran out of there. Saudis, proxies, the Saudis were proxies for the U.S. They ran them out of there. And the Yemen people demonstrate spirit and unity, the power of that. And now they're sitting over there. They got a few missiles and drones. They ain't got a whole lot. They got enough to keep the U.S. off their back. But what they have is the U.S. bombs them, and then they put 2 million people in the street. And the people say, you got 1 million people in the street at home who's saying we don't like what our government's doing. We'll put 2 million in the street in a much smaller country that says we don't care if you bomb us. We're behind it. That's true revolution. I see, and I talk to so many people and friends, and they're like, the Houthis are heroes. Yemen, people see them in a heroic manner. Your thoughts on the importance of what's happening in the Red Sea?
Oh, I think the Red Sea might be the most important battlefield in this whole regional struggle, because what they're doing, in effect, and increasingly so, is strangling the Israeli economy. Precisely what the United States tried to do to Russia with its sanctions. So the Houthis, I believe, are operating within the parameters of international law and, frankly, within the parameters of human rights law, international law, which says that gross violators of human rights, genocidist regimes, should be sanctioned. That's what we fought for and partially achieved in the struggle against apartheid. Uh, but the Houthis are not an illegal or rogue regime. They have not attacked shipping as such in the Red Sea. They've attacked uh, ships going to Israel, carrying weapons and other things to support the Israeli regime. I think it fits within the framework of international law. And if that were to be disputed, the United States and England should have taken it to the UN Security Council and had an all-out and full debate on what the Houthis are doing, the legal and moral justification for it, and let the Security Council decide. The United States cannot be the judge and jury and executioner of what is right and wrong, especially when it is arming the regime in Israel, which is carrying out genocide in Gaza, and wanting to thereby claim that by attacking the Houthis, that they are acting within international law and acting within morality. They are not. They are not. And I think, it's so interesting. Discourses are not only what is said, a discourse can be conducted by what you do. And what the Houthis are doing is giving the world and all of the big nations a lesson in what it means to be morally consistent. A lot of Arab nations have mouthed the words that they're for the liberation of the Palestinians and for a two-state solution for years, and have in fact done very, very little. The Houthis said we are for the liberation of the Palestinians and we're going to do something. And that's what we see. And it's encouraging, of course. I do agree with you that that many nations, including probably Hamas and Hezbollah, saw how weak the United States was in Ukraine, and how with all of the sanctions, with all of the military hardware that they were sending to Ukraine, they are losing. The West is losing in this proxy war. And that assessment of American and Western weakness said to them, perhaps now it is time to move. And they moved, and it changed the world. They have changed the world. Hamas has changed the world, even more than the Russians did with the Ukraine episode.
I was at the source, as you were at the event last weekend, and we were talking to friends,
Yeah.
and I remember talking to people saying, it's a terrible, tragic thing that's going on, but as long as I've been onto this Palestinian issue, I never thought I would see the day in America that 400,000 people would be in the streets screaming for freedom and victory for Palestine. That I would go ride down the road and everybody's talking about it. That's the only thing people are able to talk about, right? That is the leading edge of international politics right now. That's the first part of the conversation right now. And the resistance forces, to many in this world, are viewed as heroic. And all Tony Blinken and Joe Biden can say, all our ruling class representatives can say, Tony Blinken literally said recently, the world is looking to the United States for leadership in Israel and the Middle East.
Yeah.
That's all. The ruling class can look at this situation where they're preparing documents right now to accuse that very same Tony Blinken of genocide, and to once and for all expose the crimes of the U.S. empire. How sad is it? How pathetic is it to look at the Tony Blinken, the leader, the representative, and it's like he doesn't know what to say. It's like he has nothing. They look at him, and all he can do is reach back. Tony, everything's falling apart. The people in your country despise you. The people around the world hate you. Your Ukraine project is falling apart. Trump's winning. Ukraine's everything is going bad. The Middle East, the Israelis their economy is crashing, and they're losing to a bunch of guys that all they have is small arms fire and a bad attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing Tony Blinken can say when they look at him is the Baghdad Bob. They're looking at us for leadership. I hung my head. As much as I despise Tony Blinken, I hung my head and said, you have just admitted complete defeat with that statement.
Yeah.
Dr. Tony.
Yeah, I agree with the way you deconstruct his statements. And, I would say to everybody that you just can't take what they say. You have to get below the words and deconstruct what they're saying. And you're absolutely right. First of all, he's obviously delusional. And he's probably the most powerful person in Washington. He and Jake Sullivan run that administration, and Biden is a face, an empty suit, as it were, and they are in panic. He's delusional. He's out of touch with reality. They have no plan B. Blinken, at the start of this war in Gaza, he went over, and the first thing he said when he got off the plane in Israel, I'm Jewish, and therefore I'm down with whatever Netanyahu and the Israelis do. And then they promise to make all kinds of weapons and ammunition available to them. The South Africans are absolutely right in taking the United States and the Biden government to the ICJ. And again, the 154 nations that voted for a ceasefire were voting against the United States and Israel. How to put it? I think that a new world is being born. We are very fortunate to be alive at this time. Monday was Martin Luther King's birthday. And, everyone of conscience, of principle, should reflect upon him, especially the great speech opposing the war in Vietnam, where in that speech he took his life into his hands when he opposed the war makers. And he said that his own government, the US government, was the major purveyor of violence in the world. And the bombs dropped in Vietnam explode in the ghettos and poor communities across this country. And all of that is true today. But the Black misleadership class has turned the celebration of King's birthday, which should be a moment of moral reflection, meditation, and recommitment. They've turned it into a farce. Here in Philadelphia, the mayor hosted Joe Biden. A Black woman who was our mayor hosted him. And this empty gesture of so-called giving out food to the poor. Garland, I have to say, I guess I'm more upset at the Black misleadership class, the elected officials, most of the preachers, most of the intellectuals, most of those who we see on television. I think I'm more upset with them at times than I am with white Joe Biden. You know, somehow the quisling and the collaborator is even more dangerous than the direct oppressor, because they, in many ways, disarm the people and disunites them. But I say all of that to say that back to Trump and his victory in Iowa, it is a sign. It is telling us something that we have to take seriously. And it is telling us more about the people than it is about Trump or Nikki Haley or DeSantis. And this is what we have to keep our eye on, the people. Because what I saw in that vote is the Trump forces being more united than they were in 2016, than they were in 2020. No one could have predicted this, that level of unity. And the Democrats are bleeding support among its core constituents, in the first instance, African Americans. So, I mean, we see what the equation is. We see the geography. The question for people like you and I is whether we get on board. I guess I sound like Curtis Mayfield. Get on board. There's something happening. The country is about to change in very fundamental ways. Obviously, we are witnessing a historic political realignment. When 30% of Black men say they're voting for Trump, and who are we to say that they are not going to bring their daughters and their aunts and their girlfriends and their wives along with them? And for Black people to abandon the Democratic Party and go towards the Republican Party with all of the baggage that Trump brings, and he has a lot of baggage, you know, with all of that, they see him as a symbol of opposition to people who had, to a ruling elite, a political class who had betrayed them. And I don't think anyone feels as betrayed as Black folk do. And where do we go? What do we do is the question before us all.
You know, I always go back to the Malcolm X discussion about the house and the house Negro and the slave Negro,
Right.
where he says, well, when you come to the house Negro and say, run away, why should I run away? I live here. I got good food. I eat the master's food. I wear the master's clothes. Hey, why should I run away? It ain't all that bad. But when you go to the field slave, he's beaten every day. He's fed cornmeal mush. He's mistreated. His kids are he's treated terrible. He's worked 25 hours a day. And if you say to him, let's run away, the idea is he might be in the woods. It may be cold. He might not have enough to eat. The dogs may be chasing him. He might get caught, whipped, or anything. But what does he say? Any place is better than here.
Right.
And I think that's what you're saying. I see people in the chat, Trump's terrible, Trump's this, Trump's that. All the things they say about Trump, I agree with. As you said, all the baggage Trump has, it's all there. But I think the ruling elite, particularly the Democratic Party, in continually lying and deceiving to the Black America and just saying, give us your votes and we'll give you something. And they get nothing but lied to, stomped in, and sent to the front lines every time there's a war, have gotten to that point where they can look at Trump. I've had people literally say to me, I think Trump's a racist, but I'm going to support him. Because what they're literally saying is the ruling elite has created an environment so bad for us that any place is better than here. And I think to some people, Trump is that any place. Not the people like me who've moved on, and I'm, as I said, I'll be writing in Che Guevara and and who knows, Kwame Nkrumah. I'll put in the ghost of Kwame Nkrumah, that name up. But you know what my point? My point is that you can't disrespect those people. and call them stupid or ignorant. The pragmatism is, I've been had by the same people over and over and over. Any place is better than where I am now. I'll give something else a try, because what you're giving me now is so bad that I can't live with it. I can't even stand it anymore.
Yeah, I think, don't forget, in 1968, when the race was apparently between Johnson and Nixon, at the height of the Vietnam War, the height of the protests against the Vietnam War, King gives a speech on April 4th, 1967, against the war in Vietnam. The whole ruling elite and most Black leaders came out against King. They tried to smear him. They tried to say he was out of touch. The big thing is peace and civil rights don't mix. That King has lost his mind, that King, everything bad that you could say about King. My point is, it kicked off a deep ideological struggle within the Black community. That is what we're going to go through this year. People can have every opinion they want about Trump, but does that exonerate Biden? I mean, let's say, if you say, as they're saying, you listen to MSNBC especially, where the line is that Trump is the closest thing to Hitler that the world has seen since World War II, since Hitler, And as such, since the choice is between Hitler and Biden, between fascism and democracy, we should choose democracy. However, that framing of the political moment opens up the opportunity for a real ideological struggle over what is democracy, and do we really have it, and who is a fascist. Let us say one makes the claim that Trump is a fascist. Well, my question is, what does that make Joe Biden? What is Joe Biden? One of the conditions and definitions of fascism is war. It's not just to bring authoritarian political parties to power. It is for the sake of conducting war. Who I would say the last 50 years has brought the nation closer to world war than Joe Biden? And the longer they keep this thing going in the Middle East, the longer they keep bombing Yemen and threatening Iran and giving weapons to Israel to bomb in Gaza, and as long as the United States diplomatically in the UN and other places blocks any international solution to this problem, to that extent, the closer we get to world war. And we are. People say a regional war in the Middle East. Well, a regional war in the Middle East brings us as close to world war as you ever want to get. Look what you got there. Some of the most developed, most technologically advanced, organized militaries in the world. Turkey is no joke. Iran is no joke. Hezbollah is no joke. And now we're seeing the Houthis are no joke. And these people are prepared and willing to fight. Oh, you're going to bomb them back into the Stone Age? So you think? I mean, so if part of the definition, I think the major part of the definition of fascism is war. Well, what does that make Joe Biden and his administration? They are closer to fascists. And, by the way, let's not forget about what's going on the Korean Peninsula. A tinderbox. And recently, the government of North Korea said, well, we now realize that that South Korea is not a fraternal people with the North, but is an enemy nation aligned with our greatest enemy, the United States. And so they've given up on even the idea of peaceful reunification, which means they're closer to war. And this is all over the globe. And I think the American people, well, Black people in particular, we have to have a principled discussion. Hakeem Jeffries, the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, our mayors, our city council, come on out from behind the veil of your position. Engage the people. We want to know where you stand on war and peace, where you stand on turning the American economy from a military industrial economy to a peace industrial economy. We want to know what you're going to do, not just about physical infrastructure, but about the human infrastructure. Are you going to re-industrialize the country? Are you going to employ the unemployed? Will there be a new war on poverty? Will you provide care for all those young people who are strung out on the most lethal drugs we've ever seen? Will this become a humane society? And will eventually the United States become, like James Baldwin said, the last white nation, where people who think they're white don't have a need to be identified as white? And will we, as Baldwin argued, thereby achieve our nation? This is what's at stake. But, you get these politicians who are hiding behind, we're Democrats and Trump is a fascist, and that's all we got to know, and bring out the black vote for Biden. And I would say to people, it's not that simple. Far more complicated, and we're in the throes of something we've not seen. And again, I say a political realignment. Just one other thing. Politically, the center has collapsed. This whole idea the center cannot hold, and the center has not held. Two conflicting camps are now in pretty much what looks like a class conflict for power.
I'm glad you brought up the center not holding, because that takes me exactly to the next place I wanted to go. You're in Philadelphia. My office is in Washington, D.C. They marched right by my office the other day on K Street. And I drive around, and everywhere I see in Washington, D.C., the jewel of the empire, right? You've referred to the cities as the jewels of the empire, right? You know what I see everywhere? Closed. Rent for rent, space for rent, restaurant for rent, this for rent, that's for rent, right? It's falling apart. I'm looking at it, and they're saying, can we get people to go back to work, please? The mayors are saying that the city's falling apart. You're around the corner from the White House, and there's tents everywhere, right? You're stepping over homeless people, the people in misery and heart, people with talking to themselves, mentally ill, unable to care for themselves, and they're thrown out on the street to freeze and starve to death, eating out of trash cans, treated like animals, right? So for years, here's what we heard from the liberal elite. 9 out of 10 of the poorest states in America are red states. And they were right. The South, I always make the argument that the poverty in the South is a legacy of slavery, that the free labor destroyed the economies in the South, and they've never recovered. That being said, for all that we hear about this, and I'll use this term, this liberal elite, that faux liberal elite, look at the cities. They're telling us we're here for this group, the LGBT. We're smarter than everybody. We went to better schools than ever. We did this. Look at their city, Baltimore City, Philadelphia. People are afraid to go. Like people are like, oh, I'm scared to go into Baltimore. People are afraid who are in the suburbs to go in the city because the crime is there. The desperation in the city. You literally see videos of a bunch of people running into a Louis Vuitton store, grabbing everything, running out. And people say, what do you think about that, Garland? They're looting the store. I say, because the people on Wall Street are looting the country. What do you expect them to do when they see their leaders, when they see Joe Biden and his son selling some piece of crap art for $800,000 just because they can get it because they're in power? You're going to get mad at the desperate people who are looting a Louis Vuitton purse that costs $20 to make and they're making for $1,100. They know they're being had. They're in desperation. You're going to get mad at them when Jamie Dimon and those people are looting everything we got. I'm not mad at them. I understand their desperation, number one. But number two, your thoughts on the collapse of the cities. I mean, downtown Miami, downtown San Francisco, everything's closed. It's a disaster. These are the people that tell us we're smarter than everybody else. We're great rulers. We're standing up for the LGBT community. We're standing up for they make up new names, BIPOCs. I had to say, what in the hell is, oh, that's Black or Indigenous people of color. Get out of here with that. But at any rate, your thoughts on the collapse of the cities that are run by these people.
Well, what can one say? I mean, these great cities are collapsing. A big part of the collapse of these cities has to do with deindustrialization. Philadelphia, like Baltimore, was a manufacturing city. It's not like Detroit or Pittsburgh or Gary, where you had automobile production, which dominated in these huge auto plants, and in Gary, Indiana, these big steel plants, in Pittsburgh. But Philadelphia was closer to Baltimore. We're a manufacturing city, and diverse manufacturing. And of course, in Baltimore, you have the Port of Baltimore, and in Philadelphia, the Port of Philadelphia. And that employed a lot of people and allowed people to get into that middle income status. But the double hit of deindustrialization and technological change ruined these cities. And you can go around Philadelphia and you go to neighborhoods, you still see these factories. Mm-hmm. And you, if you were alive in the time when they were working, you would see people who lived not far walking to the factory to go to work. And almost everybody in Philadelphia, and I'm certain in Baltimore, worked. And almost everybody that worked belonged to a union. It is the exact opposite today. You needed public education and you needed vocational schools because you were training the working class. The U.S. industrial base and the working class that pretty much ran these industries and these factories were admired and the envy of the world. When Mao Zedong and the Chinese talked about industrializing China after the revolution, they didn't look to England or London, they looked to the United States. And they saw this highly educated, highly disciplined, highly organized working class. Deindustrialization destroyed that. And then on top of it, you got gentrification, where you were going to make, for example, in Philadelphia, the center of the economy of Philadelphia, the universities and the hospitals, so-called service industry. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, but then that wasn't enough, because the reproduction of the working class is based upon the reproduction of industry, of work. And if you don't have work, you can't reproduce the working class, and you push it down, the working people down into what is called the lumpen proletariat. Poor, and without a class identification. And then after the working class has collapsed, just to show you how important the working class is, the middle class, the professional educated classes, which rose on the shoulders of the working class, the collapse of the working class led to the collapse of the middle class. We see that in Philadelphia. That's what, if you've ever heard of Kensington, this huge open air drug market. The majority of people on the street in Kensington are white and from the lower and middle class. Collapsed completely. So the collapse of the cities begins with the collapse of the working class, and then the collapse of the middle class. Stores don't open up because people can't afford to buy anything or buy what these stores are selling. Unless we break this cycle of war and austerity, of war and deindustrialization, of war and economic inequality, unless we break this cycle, more cities will go like Philadelphia and Baltimore. And Philadelphia is the poorest of the top 10 largest cities. You know, I know Philadelphia. It's tragic. I see what's happening to young people. I see what's happening to children. I see that there is hardly a public education system worth calling it such. This is it's a social crisis. I would even go so far as to say it's a civilizational crisis.
I would agree, and I think this is the last thing I'll end with. This is a great example and an expression of the decay of our economic model, and that is the predatory school loans. You know, they were Biden and those people were talking about forgiving some school loans. Okay, all right, okay. Let's say you did, which they're not going to. How is that going to change the dynamic that we have? So you got a group of people. Let's say you forgive every school loan. What difference does it make? Because number one, the banks won't be all that mad because the government's just going to pay them off anyway. You say forgive them. No, that means the government takes the money of the people and then pays it off. Right? If they print the money and they sell the bonds for printed money, we're going to have to pay that back sooner or later anyway. Sooner or later, people say they just print money. Sooner or later, it's going to come back to haunt us. But what I'm seeing, I was watching something the other day and they were saying more and more young men are saying, I'm not going to college. Why? Because I don't want to end up with those loans. Young men, people who used to be, I'm going to have a wife and 2.5 children and a minivan. This was what young men, nah, because I'll be too long paying off the school. I'm trying to go in another direction. But the other direction used to be manufacturing jobs. That's not there.
Yeah.
So we're creating desperation. But your thoughts on the predatory school loans, on what they're doing to the academic system, the predatory school loans, and let me add this, and you know this as well as I do. You go to a college now, and this building is the so-and-so building, named after some billionaire, named after some corporation. Now that they're putting all the money, they want to affect who's chosen to run this college. They want to get their person running this college. Now they want to choose the curriculum. And so this monstrous neoliberal economic system now says we're going to prey on these people when they're 18, 19. And once they turn 23, we have them in debt for the rest of their lives, but they can't buy a house. They can't buy a car. And now this system is just collapsing. It's eating itself alive because it needs to sell them other things, but they're already in debt. So they can't buy the other things you're trying to sell them. Anyway, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you put it very well. I mean, it's a vicious cycle. You know, first of all, college education is grossly overpriced. And if it were a just system, most of it would be free anyway, especially for state schools and state-supported schools. It's overpriced. It's been marketed as a way to success. People bought it, but they didn't have the money to pay for it, so they had to go into debt to pay for an education that really isn't worth what they're paying for. And that's why young people, and especially young men, are saying, I don't think that's the route I'm going to take. I don't want to go into debt and end up not doing that much better than I would do if I didn't go to college, probably doing better. So it's a scheme invented by banks and corrupt university administrators. You got more administrators than professors in these colleges, and you know, whenever you have that, it's a corrupt scheme. Uh, but the rich people who have bought these universities, who finance them, and they're over it. They're not doing all the financing they claim they're doing, because these universities get a lot of money from military contracts and corporate contracts and other things. However, they have more say than they deserve. And they're saying, we want to decide what goes on in these universities. And see, this is a little bit deeper than just who is the president. What they were saying to the president of Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania and the president of MIT at that congressional hearing, and this guy Aikman and these other billionaires are saying, we want you to crack down on freedom of speech of these students. That's the issue. We want a curriculum that is pro-Zionist, pro-imperialist, pro-finance capital, and anti-democratic. We want a university like Harvard or the University of Pennsylvania to produce an elite which upholds a system of war, of American empire, and has no conscience. That's what we want. We don't want universities to produce a Martin Luther King. We don't want universities that will produce a W.E.B. Du Bois. We don't want another Angela Davis coming out of the University of California. We don't want a university, for example, that's in West Philly like University of Pennsylvania, or North Philly like Temple University. We don't want those universities connecting to the people of those communities. We don't want that. We want an elite education. That's what they're about. And they're saying we want presidents of those universities who symbolize the type of repressive, anti-democratic, immoral, pro-war education that serves American empire. That's what they're saying. And, you know, the students are fighting back. And I must take my hat off to this generation. For those of them who don't know, you are outdoing my generation who fought against the war in Vietnam. This movement is far more developed than that one was. And I think the young generation, especially those coming out of these universities who are protesting, have made a tremendous contribution to democracy and, frankly, to humanity. And I'm so proud and so moved by them. I don't know what to say sometimes, but I just want to congratulate them. And I know people keep saying of your and my generation, well, what do we teach the younger generation? A guy asked me this question on a webinar the other day on Martin Luther King. I said, well, the first thing that most of us need to do is shut up and sit down, because you don't have anything to teach, because you never learned anything, most of you. And that which most of you learned, you forgot and you sold out. And I would say, let this generation do its thing. I feel very confident about this, Garland.
You know, I was teaching when Osama bin Laden was killed. I was teaching a course I think the one particular course, I was teaching a number of courses. One of them was organized crime. I remember that class. And I remember the students come in and I had talked to, and I said, I want to listen to what you all have to say, because they all said, well, only thing we've known is, we grew up with all of this stuff. And so I asked them questions. I listened, what do you, and I learned a lot from those students. And I remember going to the chair of the department and the assistant chair. And one of the things that was said to me was, not necessarily by one of them, but by one of the leading intellectuals, right, was what we need to do is bring the students in, sit them all out, in a big lecture hall. We'll sit up on stage and we'll discuss it so they can learn. And what I said was, I think we need to sit in a lecture hall. And I think we need to put the students up on the stage, and we need to listen to them, and we need to learn where they're coming from. We all know where we're coming from. We know our perspective. It is that idea that we have all the info. And I love what you're saying. That is, you have to learn from the young people. And I think that's beautiful, and I think some of them are starting to realize, what? I owe $150,000 and I got a degree in gender studies. What the hell am I going to do? But only thing I do is pay, and now I'm working at Pizza Hut now and driving Uber. And, I think that reality is waking a lot of them up. Well, thank you very much, Tony. Once again, let everybody know where they can find the information on the Saturday Free School.
Well, the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. Google us. Go to Facebook and put in the Saturday Free School. Go to YouTube, put in the Saturday Free School. Go to Spotify, Twitter, and Instagram. And you'll learn about us. In fact, we live stream our Saturday sessions. We start about 10:30 every Saturday. And just go to our Facebook page or go to our YouTube page. And you see what we talk about. We talk about everything from religion and the decline of the mainline denominations and what that means in American society. We're doing this year, the 100th anniversary of the birth of James Baldwin, who is greater and more profound and more revolutionary than most know. We're calling this year James Baldwin, God's Revolutionary Voice. Our inauguration will be February 17th. And so that's the way to find us.
When you said religion, if you got a couple more minutes, I got one more thing I got to say. And I think it's critical. I know we all got to go to bed, but this is really important. One of the things that I think that has been so wonderful and impressive about the issue with the Zionists is the way people in the Jewish community have stepped up to lead the fight against Zionism and against the apartheid. I had some concern, and I'll be frank with you. I thought to myself, Joe Biden's, his cabinet is very heavily Jewish, right?
Yeah.
When I saw Zionists, Jewish, right-wing kooks, when I saw what was happening in Israel, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is not going to work out well for Jewish people. I feared, you know what I mean, that there could be violence against Jewish people. Oh my gosh, they'll be blowing up synagogues. They'll be attacking. They'll be blaming all Jewish people for this. They'll be looking at Joe Biden's cabinet saying, see, look what the Jews did to us. I had a fear. Because, some of my dearest friends are, family members. My brother who passed away was a converted Jew. He was in the military. He converted to Jew. He passed away recently, but he was converted Jew, right? And so I looked at it, and I still know some of his friends that were over at his house from his temple, and we were over there. Oh, we were like family, right? One of my closest buddies, Mike, Jewish, right? On and on and on. And I thought, man, I hope this doesn't bring violence towards the Jewish people. But the way the Jewish people have stepped up and have led the fight and have put their bodies on the line, I think that has been just a breath of fresh air for me. And it has brought me down off the ledge of fear that there would be some mass movement or anger turning against Jewish people and blame them for that. And people are understanding this is Zionism. Joe Biden ain't Jewish. He's a Zionist. You have a comment on that before we go?
Yeah, coming up in the left, and the anti-war and other movements, anti-apartheid movement, and having met a generation or two ahead of me, I met those great revolutionary Jews. We've seen the movie Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
He was Jewish, but he was produced by a Jewish political intellectual community that was also nourished by Albert Einstein. Or I knew Jews who had gone through the Holocaust, who were in the Warsaw Ghetto when the Nazis tried to exterminate all of those people. I knew those kind of people. So when there was this shift, apparently, in the politics and morality of the Jewish community after the 1967 war, where many of them withdrew from the civil rights movement, withdrew from the anti-war movement, and said we have to be concerned about ourselves. And Zionism, which was one but not necessarily the dominant position politically among Jews, suddenly becomes the dominant position. And the Jews became a people that I did not recognize. And I decided, I don't want anything to do with them. This is a people overcome with hatred, overcome with opportunism, egotism and narcissism, and I didn't want anything to do with Jews. I had Jewish friends, of course, but Jews as a people in the United States, I said that there's nothing good that can come out of this. And then Jewish Voices for Peace, and Not in My Name, and the Hasidim Jews, who I never would have expected to be such a powerful force in all of this. And I said, here is the salvation for the Jews. Because you're right, humanity had turned against them. And of course, in the Middle East, it will take generations to heal the Arab people. What the state of Israel has done, they will have to atone for several generations. I think that in the interest of the Jews, who are no more than about 17 million people in a world population of 8 billion, but very, very powerful, the Jews will have to atone, and the state of Israel will have to cease to exist. A one-state democratic Palestine, maybe Palestine/Israel, will have to emerge, but this cannot continue. Israel has to be demilitarized and denazified. Most of the Israeli population will have to be re-educated. Obviously, Jews from the United States and other Western countries are fleeing Israel because they see the catastrophe that is about to happen. And the Jews here in the United States will have to be re-educated. They will have to be retaught their own history. They will have to be taught to abandon Zionism, which is a form of racism, especially anti-Black and anti-Palestinian racism. They will have to become a new or different people. But I think it has begun. I just can't tell you how moving it is for me to be in demonstrations and civil disobedience activities with Jewish Voices for Peace, the best of the Jewish people. And I just like to say, the best of the Jewish people have always in this country been connected to the Black struggle for civil rights and equality. Once they abandon us, the anchorage, moral anchorage was lost.
Dr. Tony Montero, thank you very much. All right, everyone. And don't forget, check out the Saturday Free School, Dr. Tony Montero's fine work in Philadelphia. Everyone, make sure you save this and share this on all of your social media channels. If you get a chance, there's a myriad of ways going along the bottom. If you can contribute to the channel, that's wonderful. If you can't, that's okay. Spend the money on your family and make sure you just share it on all your social media platforms. Hit the like button. We're on Rockfin, Rumble, Twitch, Facebook, you name it, all over the place. So wherever your page is, make sure you share this. Thanks a lot, Dr. Tony Montero. It's been a pleasure as always. Look forward to getting you back soon.
Thank you so much, Garland.